the vast majority of people do not do anything about their data because they do not know that they created it, that they are the beginning of their data. It wasn't foisted on them by Amazon, nor was it foisted upon them by Google or Netflix. You are your data, and your data is now you. So what you decide to do with that is really, I think, part of the reason why we're all here today, to discuss who owns what, or who owns you. Because you see, the real issues here are ones of a very fundamental change. We are the people in this room because of that change. And as I said, revolutions often start in places like this. And they start by asking questions like, so, what connects us? What brings us together? And if we are connected, what binds us? And what are the rules that bind us? And that's how all revolutions begin. That's how the cryptocurrency revolution began in the first place, right? Or internet. It was things thrown out to the public in an open source fashion, and people coming back with answers as to how this can all be brought together. And then out of this dystopia, this disillusion that was occurring, people started to ask, how can we make it better? And then we looked for solutions. So one of the solutions that we've been working on, actually prior to blockchain really hitting us and really understanding what was going on, was something called the International Tribunal of Natural Justice, which is a few cool guys got together and they decided that, you know, it's about time that actually the big questions of the day were actually asked. You know, I'm a barrister. That's how I started off. I was the youngest head of chambers in the history of the UK bar. I had 30 barristers under me at the age of 27. And I never got to court where any of these questions were getting asked. So someone was actually deciding the process in which data actually hit the courts before it hit us. Everyone had the same questions. They were big questions. But they were ones that were left unanswered. But the opportunity that blockchain, cryptocurrency, distributed ledger, whatever phrases you want to use right now to discuss this new technology, what actually brought us all together was the fact that with those kind of technologies, suddenly you, the people, could become the judges. You, the people, could become the evidence gatherers. You, the people, could decide what is true or not. Because that's what immutable truth is, right? It's permissionless. It's public orientated. And you all have a part of it. So I'm just going to show a couple of bits and pieces so you know what I'm talking about. So this here is, and I'll just move my hand like that and stop, okay? I'm taking it in about 5 minutes in on this one, yeah. So this is a gentleman by the name of Anthony Stansfield, who was actually a police commissioner in the UK, very important man, and it's about him talking about how he cannot believe that what he wants to say can't get heard either by courts or by judges. And as a result of this particular hearing that we did at the ITNJ, so that's over here, actually it did change a lot of things. He got called in by Parliament. It's about, a lot of it's about KPMG and a lot of corruption that occurred there in regards to South Africa. Quite a lot of other instances as well, like Barrage, I think is a recent one, and Co-op, and the collapse particularly of HBOS Bank in 2008. Okay, yeah, without further ado, just to give everyone a bit of flavour. Thanks.
Not absolutely certain of that figure. And only 10% ever got out of GRG. Now you'd think if these were toxic companies that were collapsing, GRG would be losing money. They made an enormous profit. And the head of that is now chief executive for Santander, which I find personally extraordinary, and that was said in the House of Commons by Sir Vince Cable. There was an interesting, I think, sideline to all of this, that most police forces do not have the money or the capacity or the capability to take on fraud cases. When you find you're legislating or prosecuting a bank, they have the smartest London solicitors. They will have unlimited money to spend on their legal cases. The police, I said, it cost us £7 million. We didn't get much of that back. We got £2 million back from the Treasury, from the Home Office. No private individual can really take a case against the bank. They will put the case off, they will come up with every problem, and even people who are still well off after they have had all their companies taken away from them, or their homes or anything, they will still, the case will be put off and put off. And there's a 6-year statute of limitations, which the bank is well aware of on cases, and they play on that. I've seen major, when I say companies, into the several hundred million pounds that have been removed off people, and they simply are out-lawyered in the courts. And I don't think the courts are remotely supportive, and I think you heard that in the case we just heard. The repossessions from Lloyds and RBS are still going on. I went to see Dame Linda Dodds, who's doing the internal inquiry of Lloyds, the other day, and as I walked down Doughty Street to go and see her, I was rung up by a lady who was having her property taken away as she spoke to me on the phone. The police were there, the people, the bailiffs were there, and I couldn't do anything about it. There was a court order. Do I think that court order was a fair one and had been got at properly? No, I don't for a moment think it had been. But there was nothing I actually could do about it at that stage. I think, it's a personal opinion, that something has gone seriously rotten in the leadership of some of our major banks at the moment. One staggering thing is that there is nobody on the board. I think there is one person on the board of our major banks, clearing banks, who's a qualified banker. They simply are not qualified bankers. They're all accountants or just businessmen who have ended up. And of course they are making absolute millions. And their legal expenses are not paid by them, they're paid by their shareholders. Lloyds ran up a bill, I believe it was by 900 million for lawyers last year. And one wonders whether it's protecting the banks or the boards of the banks. And I have considerable doubts of that. I think there are a number of things we need to do to put a stop to this. I think we've got to have a proper Chapter 11 system in this country, that you can't bankrupt a company overnight. Every other country has one. We don't have one. I think you've got to remove the statute of limitations in bank cases, that they can't deliberately put off cases indefinitely, say it runs out of time. I think you've got to have a proper tribunal system set up to sort out compensation for the people that have been defrauded. I think it should be compulsory that at least half the board of a bank should actually be qualified to be bankers. I think you've got to put a stop to this unlimited personal guarantees that are outrageously abused. People with small debts who are bankrupted then have their assets stolen off them that are worth many, many times their original debt. And that is divided up between the cronies, in my view, of as we've heard, the insolvency practitioners and others, and vast sums of money simply disappears. Where did it look?
Right, so there's some pretty incredible things to hear from a police commissioner there. Money being stolen by cronies, these insolvency practitioners then divided up amongst their cronies. So that's the kind of language that you get when you have an unfiltered, decentralised legal system. That's it. Right? Isn't that the sort of law you want? Isn't that the kind of police commissioner you want? You've got to make your own decisions. Now you can get the opportunity to make your decisions in this new world of data. Because in this new world of data you control what happens and you control your destiny. In one way of looking at it. In another way of looking at it, it's all going to get a lot worse and you're going to be squeezed even more tightly. So, but this is the choice that you've got to make, and that's what I'm trying to say right now, is that with things like what JP's creating here, there's the opportunity for you to have value in your content. If you value your content, this is content, and this is content. This is me being content. And you're content when you own your content. So the key bit here is to understand that the moment that you start to value that as much as other people value it, and you can have access to exchanges like JP is creating, and other ways of transacting, and knowing how to hold on to that value, that's the moment in which you can actually start to control what happens to you. Because some very bad things can happen to you. Can you play the next next tape around about 2-3 minutes in maybe. And you're going to see what happened to a policeman, a police informer, a whistleblower. Now this whistleblower was found huge corruption within the police force, mainly to do with paedophilia and state organised paedophilia, which we're all getting more and more familiar with, what's happening recently with the Vatican and other churches and other situations. Okay, just play it, just hear it. The more unfettered it is by me, the more raw it is for you. Thank you.
3 minutes?
Yeah.
Now boats had a lot of poignancy in as much as there was freedom to travel. The canal network was very old and therefore didn't get policed, and children like boats. And the BBC had a programme at the time which sort of, it was to do with two little dolls that lived on a canal boat called Rosie and Jim, and it was tied in at the same time as I was looking into this, so kids were drawn to the waterways. I'll get back to the main story, but the reason for telling this bit was that I was told that there were 2 sex offenders. I was asked to look into it as a field intelligence officer, and if I found another 2 within a set period of time, they'd be happy. Within that period of time, I found 90. I came into work and I was told by a high-ranked officer that the inquiry had been shut down, and the reason given was that they couldn't afford the funding for me. But I had been approached by a Scotland Yard detective who told me, he said, when you investigate any crime and you do well at it, you get praised. When you look into child abuse cases, the opposite happens. Be very careful. He then told me about a cabinet minister that they'd investigated on a few occasions, and on each occasion they've been shut down. So I was aware that this had gone on. When I questioned the senior officer about, the real reason, he told me, John, I'm so sorry it's come from high up, there's nothing I can do, and promised me any job I wanted. So I moved onto the vice unit. So I was expecting to be praised for what I found out. Each day a new child would be found, and it was just spiralling. I was brought before someone who is now a very high-ranked officer in the UK indeed, and he sat me down and he said, John, I've got to be very upfront with you. And I said, well, I'd like to be upfront with you, Governor, as well. And he said, you're out of all the officers I've got here, there was about, 40 officers, he said, you're the second best one I've got, which was a good accolade. He said, but unfortunately, you've dug too deep, what the hell have you done? Now, on a personal level, since the beginning of 2000, I brought up 4 children on my own, and this was common knowledge within my unit. And he said to me, if you ever disclose what you found out, you will lose your home, your children, and your job. You must shut the F up. And he said, you will be thrown to the wolves. You have no idea who and what you are dealing with. He said, I'm warning you now, you must back away. And then he said something quite strange, and he said that if you say a word of this, and even if you make a complaint, it will come back to me and it will go in the bin. I and no one else will ever betray fellow rank. Shut your mouth. So I walked away from that investigation, and I moved on. I was offered to stay, but I couldn't. What was very strange was that the main witness, the young girl that came forward, was found dead in the street very shortly afterwards on a suspicious drug overdose, which sort of compounded matters. I then moved on to work on child abuse investigations, which is slightly different to vice, and I can, if I have the time, explain why there is this compartmentalisation within these institutions. And it's all down to remits and justifiable reasons for actually doing nothing as opposed to doing something. I went on to a child abuse unit in one of the poorer boroughs of London, and I was asked if I would like, as well as an investigator, take on a second role dealing with various sort of issues they have. And I was told you'll get a day here and there to go to a meeting. And I asked to look into if anyone was dealing with children's homes. I was told no, there was an officer that was dealing with children's homes, but she left 2 years ago, and she didn't do anything anyway because nothing happens, there's no problem. And I asked this sergeant are there any problems with child prostitution within the kids' homes? He said, what do you want about? No, of course not. I got a list, and this is almost real time as I'm telling it now. I got a list faxed through to me from social services with all the children's homes. There was 26 kids' homes. I picked up the phone and I spoke to the fella and I asked him how many kids they have. And on an average, there's about 5 children reside in this children's home. And I said, no, I'm not pointing the finger, no one's in any trouble. How many of these children do you lose at the weekend? Which is the usual pattern of missing, you know, when kids go missing. So out of 5, we lose 3. And I said, no, honestly, what happens to them? They went, oh, they're being pimped out. So I found this officer that had dealt with it for years had found none. Within this, honestly, this was the time, as we're speaking now, within this period of minutes, I found 3. By the end of that day, I found 6. By the end of 3 days to 5 days, I found 50. I held a meeting with all the concerned agencies, which involved charities, which involved NGOs, which involved social services, and I highlighted the problem. And I was then harangued, really. I was attacked verbally by head of children's services for this borough, saying to me, what the effing hell have you done? And I said, well, you knew about these kids. I said, yeah, but they hadn't come home, so we're not worried. The children were making money, so therefore the children weren't worried. The children had a boyfriend, which was their pimp, therefore they thought this was love. And the children were also using drugs, so therefore they want to continue to use drugs, so they weren't coming to notice, so therefore social services had written them off, despite the fact that the children's homes would constantly be getting in the logs that they were being picked up and they were going missing. These were regular missing persons. The police have a missing persons unit. They say so many thousands of kids go missing every year. They do, but a lot of them do return. But what is never looked into is what happens when they're going missing. They are working as prostitutes. And again,
so you get a picture of what data looks like when it's unfettered. You get a picture of what is going on when it's unfiltered. So who should really be deciding what comes up on our screens? Who should really be deciding what comes up in our courts? Now, when you've got a centralised court system, it made a lot of sense a long time ago to have one, because you had to have somewhere where all the barristers could go. We were all based in the Temple, and we wished to wander across the road as the Royal Courts of Justice, and we all had our wigs and our gowns on. And it kind of made sense, then we could all identify each other and we could sort of see who each other was. But we live in a much bigger planet now. And the issues you're seeing up there are just issues that happen in London. There's a whole world of issues. There's a globe of problems. There's also a world of people who can sort them out. And there's also a lot of people who will never ever meet physically who can work together to sort these issues out. You see, data analytics cut both ways. And in this age of data, what that means is not only does McDonald's get to see what my eating habits are, but also I can see what McDonald's is up to too. Monsanto doesn't just get to grow my vegetables, I can see what Monsanto does too. And it goes both ways. So there's a thing called the wisdom of the crowds. And there is a wisdom in that, if it's weighted in the right way. But there is a wisdom in the crowds. We should rely on that. And that can be brought together through data collection, sortition, evidence gathering by crowds, crowdfunding. Sanctions can be brought in by crowds. It worked with South Africa, worked with many other ways. There's share activism through crowdfunding. There's many methodologies in which to look at, which we can make the data revolution. Because like I said, all revolutions start with small groups of people like this. So I hope you tell someone else and it passes on. But the revolution has begun. We just may not be a part of it yet. We're sort of letting the state and the corporations fight each other over it. There is this other group of people called the individual. And the individual as a collective is a very powerful force. So thank you very much for this opportunity.